Good morning to Dan Khan, Dan Bardell and Kwaku Afari. We're going to start with Chelsea, who are interested in signing Victor Osimhen from Napoli. While that happens, Napoli are negotiating a deal to sign Romelu Lukaku on a permanent deal. Dan, we've got Dan K, Dan B, Dan K. I'm going to just call you Dan. Whoever I'm looking at is the one that needs to ask the question.
Sure, no worries. We've got this. We'll sort it.
Dan, first of all, this situation, it finally looks like the Lukaku side especially is on the way to being resolved. It's taken a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you mentioned, let's start with Romelu Lukaku. You know, it feels like, as you mentioned, this situation, his 7-year association with Chelsea over 2 spells, of course, is finally coming to an end. And I think this all goes all the way back to that interview he did with our colleagues in Sky Italy in 2021, where he basically talked about how unhappy he was at Chelsea. And, I mean, you both can probably speak further about that, but it feels like his relationship with Chelsea never really fully recovered. And we see these links now with Napoli being potentially reunited with Antonio Conte, someone he had a really good spell with just a few years ago when they won the Serie A title together into Milan. So maybe finally Romelu Lukaku will find a permanent home and somewhere now he can maybe settle his career and move on.
Yeah, I think the frustrating thing for most Chelsea fans regarding Romelu Lukaku was that it was almost like the missing piece when he came back, and it was all looking like it was going well. Chelsea's fullbacks are going strong. Lukaku scored in his first appearance, I think, against Arsenal. And then it was almost, it sort of got undone by himself. It was his own undoing and it sort of backfired on him massively. But now, Kwaku, it looks like maybe a swap deal, not quite a swap deal, but both those strikers going the other way. Why now do Chelsea need someone like Victor Osimhen?
Well, you brought it up and Dan talked about it as well in terms of the breakdown in communication between Lukaku and Chelsea. When it comes to Chelsea, it's kind of cursed when it comes to strikers. You look at Chelsea strikers last season, they failed to deliver mostly. You look at Nicholas Jackson, had quite an impressive first season at Stamford Bridge, 14 goals in 35 games. He predominantly started down the middle for Chelsea, but also operated on the left-hand side. And considering he didn't take penalties for Chelsea last season, behind the incident with Cole Palmer in the Everton game aside, he was a very, very effective frontman for Chelsea. Look at Christopher Nkunku, more of a second striker, not really an out-and-out centre-forward, but obviously blighted by injuries last season. Chelsea fans, take your mind back to last pre-season where Nicholas Jackson and Christopher Nkunku dovetailed so nicely in pre-season. Nkunku got injured, could never really recover throughout the season, did manage to score 3 goals in 11 games. Chelsea fans will be expecting to see a lot more from him this year. Armando Broja, a man who started the season at Chelsea, failed to really make his mark and was loaned out to Fulham at the back end of the season. Again, it looks like his time at Chelsea's done. He's never really recovered from that ACL injury that he sustained. Kind of took away a bit of his pace. He's a striker that I expect to do well for a Premier League side, but not really in the long-term plans for Chelsea. And David Washington, just a young striker, a plethora of young Chelsea players signed from South America, still only 18 years old, only played 2 games for Chelsea, no goals. And so you look at this list of Chelsea out-and-out strikers, and you can see why they're in the market for a person who can put the ball in the back of the net on a regular basis. And that man for Chelsea, hopefully, is Victor Osimhen. Look at this record since he joined Napoli. He's been there for 4 seasons. Of course, the standout season is the 22-23 year where he spearheaded Napoli to the Scudetto, was a top scorer in the league. They won Serie A for the first time in a very, very long time. And he was a player that was on the lips of many, many football fans and many football clubs as well in terms of one of the hottest prospects in the world. He signed a new contract with that release clause that's now proven an issue for Napoli in terms of trying to sell him. He's on quite a lot of money when it comes to wages as well. But if you look at his statistics here, he hasn't, only in 1 season he played 30 or more league games, which is a problem. Better ability is availability, and for a large part of Victor Osimhen's career at Napoli, he's not been available. I got to see him at AFCON up close and personal. He's a striker that does the hard work. He does the runs in behind. He occupies defenders. But he only scored 1 goal in that tournament as Nigeria lost in the final to Ivory Coast. Tony Afoke, one of our colleagues here at Sky Sports, interviewed Osimhen out in the Ivory Coast and talked to him regarding his future at Napoli. He talked about how he's a big fan of the Premier League. He's a big fan of Didier Drogba as well. So you expect if he does join Chelsea, it would be a settling-in period, but he's a man that has ambitions of playing at the highest level, and Chelsea represents that for him. So it remains to be seen if they can get this deal done. It's very complicated when it comes to the wages and also moving on Lukaku as well. But Osimhen's a striker that I am very impressed with. In the whole, I want to know what you guys think, though. Is Osimhen the striker that will hit the ground running and maybe break that curse of Chelsea strikers?
He's a pure goal scorer, isn't he, Osimhen? I think of all the strikers Chelsea have brought in, probably since Diego Costa, he's maybe the one that seems like the most sure thing out of all the forwards that they've had since then. My concern would be the impact that it would have on Jackson. I was speaking to you earlier, you're obviously a Chelsea fan, you're saying, well, Jackson can play on the left and maybe they can facilitate each other. You've mentioned a couple of players there in Jackson and Kunku. We're not taking into account all the other attacking riches that Chelsea have them. How do they get all of those into the team? And on Jackson, I think on the face of it, if you look at his numbers, I think he got better as the season went on. The first half of the season, I was watching him and thinking, I'm not sure here. I'm not sure this is going to be a successful transfer for Chelsea. But as the season got on and Chelsea got better and they adapted to what Pochettino wanted, I actually felt he was a big part of a lot of what was good with Chelsea. And I take your point about him playing on the left, but that's him going from the centre, drifting out wide. It's a different ball game, playing wide and coming in and being that player, if you see what I mean. So I would worry about the impact that it would have on Jackson. I completely appreciate Chelsea want to get a bona fide goal scorer into the building. It's what they've been looking for since Costa. But it's very, very difficult to keep two strikers happy that both will expect to play. And I think both of them would expect to play. I
think on that point, though, Nicola, I'd probably take slightly the counter to Dan there. Two Dans arguing about Nicholas Jackson. No, because I do agree with your point that Nicholas Jackson, of course, he did have a good season last year. And as you mentioned, we all know he missed a few big chances. But I think let's not forget, he's still relatively young. Yeah. And he's also relatively young in his football career. You know, he's not played a lot of full seasons at top flight football. I think last year was maybe only his third full season in a top division, playing week in, week out. And as you mentioned, he got better. So maybe with an Osimhen type of player, taking a bit of responsibility off him every week might just allow him the room to grow as a player and get a bit more confidence maybe, and not having to dwell on missing a huge chance every week or whatever.
Do you think, though, he's that type of character? I'm basing this purely on the penalty incident, by the way, but we saw when he wasn't allowed to take the penalty. We saw when he wasn't allowed to take the penalty, his reaction to that. He strikes me as someone who isn't going to settle for being a number two striker, being a backup. And if Osimhen comes, he's number 9, he plays.
Yeah, I agree with that. You don't bring in someone like Victor Osimhen to sit on the bench or to play second fiddle to anyone. But do you not think because that Jackson, I know obviously, like you say, Dan, playing on the left is very different to playing through the middle and drifting out to the left. Quaker, are there two players that could play together, do you think, and alongside Cole Palmer and Christopher Nkunku?
They could coexist, and it's about building your squad. We've seen Arsenal building a squad. We've seen Man City build a squad. And if Chelsea want to reach the heights of those teams, Liverpool as well, when they're in the pump building the squad, then you're going to have to figure out a way to accommodate a lot of great players and maybe have those difficult conversations with Nicholas Jackson, if it's the case he's not starting week in, week out. When Chelsea signed him for Villarreal, he wasn't expected to be a starter. It just happened to fall that way because of Chelsea's frailties or lack of options up top. And so I think that you can make it work. What I will be cautious about, though, is Chelsea have had their fingers burnt when signing strikers from Italy. There's so many we can go through. You can talk about Lukaku, you can talk about Shevchenko, you can go back and talk about so many players. Big fan of Hernan Crespo, we didn't see the best of him in the Chelsea shirt. Higuain. Like, there's so many Chelsea strikers that have been signed from Italy and haven't worked out. In Italy, it's a very different league. If you've got physicality, you've got pace, you've got power, you're going to succeed in that league. And that's why we saw Lukaku succeed there, but maybe not play his best football in the Premier League. Osimhen does have the traits of successful Chelsea strikers, though. Look at the thread that ran through Hasselbank, through to Drogba, through to Diego Costa. I see those traits in Osimhen. It's whether he can assimilate to Premier League football and it's whether Chelsea can get the deal done. Very complicated because he signed a new contract last year, put him on big money, and it's now about negotiating that deal and whether Lukaku can be used as a make weight for that deal.
Are you a bit worried that it's almost like, I know PSG, there's been murmurs about them, but you're a little bit worried that you've kind of got a free run at him and there's no other interest? Because this guy was hot property 12, 18 months ago, but it almost feels like Chelsea have got a free run at him now. Does that concern you as a Chelsea fan a little bit?
The landscape of football's changed. I don't think we're going to see those big money transfers happen as regularly as we did maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And a year ago, he was the man that led Napoli to the Scudetto, so his stock was very, very high.
Unbelievable season.
He was incredible in that year. It's a very different Victor Osimhen this season. He missed some time due to AFCON, missed some time due to hamstring injury, and so his stocks are not as high right now. But I expect him to get a big move this summer because he is still a quality striker.